Hey, it's the introduction to the compare-contrast essay for our Out There Screaming unit. It's the end of the unit summative assessment worth 100 summative points. So let me tell you about it. Take some notes, please. First of all, what is a compare-contrast essay? For us, it's going to be an essay that we write under exam conditions, which means that you will be writing it without any electronics, by hand, with a pen, on paper, in class, over the course of 3 days. You'll leave your in-process essay in class each day, and you'll also be allowed to use your packets and your books as you write your essay. For this compare-contrast essay, the most important thing is that you're answering one of 3 prompts that are given to you in the packet. These are questions that are general questions about literature that you're going to apply to the 2 texts, Men We Reaped and Out There Screaming. You will need to use detailed references to both works. First to the memoir Men We Reaped, and then to one short story from the collection Out There Screaming. Think of this in the same way that I grade mastery checks, where I'm looking for at least 5 specific details in a response. You want anything you say in your essay to be full of specific textual details to support your points. You'll also need to analyze and evaluate choices of language. And for Men We Reaped, we talked about specific choices of language. There is a document with examples of 3 of these literary aspects that you can use. For Out There Screaming, you probably want to pick an allegorical object or character to analyze, or anything that's listed in the packet. And I'll make a separate video that goes into more depth about these. The next thing that you need to do, and maybe it feels strange that this is coming as the 5th bullet point here instead of right away at the beginning, but it's really not as important as answering the prompt. And it's that you draw interesting conclusions that compare and contrast the 2 works. Okay, so let's talk about how it's going to be graded. It is graded on the 4 criteria that we've been using all year and last year and forever. A, which is knowledge and understanding of the literature as well as your interpretation. For this assessment, you'll get 10 marks for criterion A. Criterion B is evaluation and analysis of language. And for this criterion, you'll also get 10 marks. Then we have criterion C, which is your organization and how persuasively organized your essay is, which is only 5 marks. And the last one is your use of language, criterion D, which again is only 5 marks. So you can see that your organization and your use of language is worth half as much as your understanding, interpretation, analysis, and evaluation. Okay, so that's why I've been focusing so much on these all year. They do, in the end, count more. Let's talk about how this works for IB students. These are the HL literature test components. You did the internal assessment in 11th grade. You did the higher level essay first semester. You're going to do a paper 1, which is worth 35%, and that correlates to the unit we did on poetry at the beginning of the semester. And now you're going to we're preparing you for paper 2, the comparative essay. So both of these are May exams. Paper 2 is the second exam that you'll take in May. It's worth 25% of your overall score. How are you going to organize this bad boy? Well, we're going to use the block method. There are different ways to organize compare-contrast essays, but the block method is a good one for us, and so that's what we're going to use. You are going to think of it in these broad strokes. The introduction comes first. The introduction always sets up your essay, ends with a thesis statement that makes an argument. And then you have these 3 pieces. The first is just going to be responding or persuading your reader of what you've argued in your thesis statement by using one text. You get to use either Men We Reaped first or a story from Out There Screaming. You get to decide. So you're only going to be talking about this first text in this section. And then after you're done talking about that text, beginning, middle, and end, dealing with all the literary aspects and all the good stuff, you'll move on to text 2. So the other one, the one you haven't talked about yet. So as you can see, you're really not talking about both texts together. You're talking about them separately. That's what block method is. It's only until this third section in your intro or in your body paragraphs that you're going to talk about both texts. Finally, you'll have your conclusion where you restate your thesis statement, leave the reader with something interesting to say. It keeps your discussion of each text neatly grouped instead of talking about both books in these other chunks. And that's really helpful if you're working with two very different works or authors, which we are. In one, we've got a memoir. In another, we've got a short story. And at that, it's a horror short story. So they are very different texts. They're very different authors as well. It's also helpful to use block method if you're answering a prompt. And we are. All right, so in your packet, there is a sample essay that I want you to take a look at. And this essay was written when I used to teach the things they carried in second semester. And so this student wrote a paper 2 compare-contrast essay on the things they carried and men we reaped. And in that essay, you'll see that his introduction is 1 paragraph, but the middle sections are more than just 1 paragraph. Now, you might do the same. This essay in the end should be about 1,000 words in length, and it is going to be difficult, I think, to write just 3 body paragraphs if you want a word count of 1,000, and if you at the same time want to keep your ideas really focused. So in the sample essay, you'll notice that they have 2 paragraphs on the things they carry that prove or argue, work to support the thesis statement. And in those 2 paragraphs, they don't say anything about the second text, men we reaped. Then they go on to talk about men we reaped in response to the prompt and the thesis statement. And so it isn't until you get to, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the 6th paragraph that they compare and contrast the 2 works. And that's what we call the evaluative paragraph. It's just 1 paragraph in their essay. Yours might be 2. It's going to be up to you. And in that essay, they talk about both books. They're talking about the same things they've already been saying about the works, but now they're looking at them in relation to each other and making evaluative claims. And then finally, they end with that concluding paragraph. The prompt that the sample essay uses is this. Some literary texts, although set in a particular place or time, convey ideas that are universal. In what ways is this true in the works you have studied? Now, the prompt is key in this essay. In fact, it is so key that I have a whole nother slide just to talk about the criterion A and the prompt. And you've got a spot in your notes to write about how important the prompt is. So these are the questions that the examiner or I am looking at as I grade your essay. And you'll notice in pink here, it says in relation to the question. So to what extent does the candidate make use of knowledge and understanding of the works to draw conclusions about their similarities and differences in relation to the question? So you finding 3 ways the texts are similar or different isn't going to work for this essay because we have to focus everything we're saying with this in mind. And criterion A is worth so much. It's worth 10 marks. In fact, if you look closely at the criteria, you'll notice that in relation to the question pops up in every single category here. And it's hard, I think, to score higher than a 1, 2, 3 if you're not responding directly to the prompt. Because it's hard to say that you're showing satisfactory knowledge and understanding of the works in relation to the question answered if you're not writing in relation to the question answered. So that's why the prompt is so important. So how do you answer it? Well, you need to look at what the prompt is asking of you, like a literary analyst. There are 3 prompts to choose from. They are in your packet. And when you're reading them, I want you to think about how would a literary analyst tackle this? What about analyzing literature from all the analysis I've had to do comes to play in this question? The first way to do that is to determine the subject of the prompt and define it. And then you're going to want to include an example of the subject right in that introduction. And then finally, you'll brainstorm a list of ideas and examples before you start writing, maybe even before you start outlining, and then choose the best ones, then outline, and then you can write your essay in class. Let's take a look at an example. So this goes back to the sample essay that's in your packet. And the first thing to do is look at what the prompt is asking of you, like a literary analyst. So the prompt says, some literary texts, although set in a particular place or time, convey ideas that are universal. In what ways is this true in the works that you have studied? A literary analyst would notice right away that there's a contrast here, right? Particular place or time versus ideas that are universal. And so determining, thinking about that contrast and that is what is at the heart of this prompt is helpful. The subject, what is the key topic of this prompt? Well, it's setting and universal ideas. So how are universal ideas shown in particular settings? Include an example of the subject in the introduction. Now this example should be outside of the texts. It should just be an example about the subject that shows that you understand what this subject is, what the prompt is asking you. So in the introduction, this is what you want to include in your introduction. You want to define the subject, oops, I got a Y there, sorry, of the prompt, include an example and apply the prompt, and then you're going to end with your thesis statement. So the sample in the packet does this. By definition, a universal idea is an idea that is discernible by anyone. So no matter where a person has been or what a person has experienced, a universal idea is something every human being shares. Now, where did they come up with that definition? They came up with it themselves after reflecting on the prompt for some time. So we've got the definition. The second thing that we're supposed to do is to include an example of it in the introduction. So then look what they have next. A universal idea might be as simple as everyone needs oxygen to breathe, or it might be as sophisticated as the meaning of life or the effect of losing someone you love suddenly. So now they have included an example, right? This first example doesn't have anything to do with the literature, as simple as everyone needs oxygen to breathe. That's not about the books. But the second one they use has to do with the books, and so that's really a way that they've applied the prompt to the texts at hand. Losing someone you love suddenly, or the effect of losing someone you love suddenly, occurs in both works that they're writing about. All right, so in your introduction, you're going to define the subject of the prompt, include an example, and apply the prompt. Then you'll need to have your thesis statement. The thesis statement needs to have these 3 things. Language from the prompt, a debatable assertion that gets at the overall meaning of the 2 texts and that answers the prompt. And then third, literary features that connect to your assertion. So here's how they ended their introduction. This is their thesis statement in the packet's example. In The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien, the universal idea of every human carrying the trauma of the past is shown through the motif of weight and things carried. While in Men We Reaped by Jesmyn Ward, the universal idea of narrative as a quest for understanding is highlighted through the motif of silence versus speech. So the language from the prompt is this universal idea. The debatable assertion has to do with the point, right, that each book is making. And then the literary features, they've got the motif of weight and things carried, motif of silence versus speech. So that works as an excellent example of a thesis statement for a paper 2 compare-contrast essay. For your mastery check for this lesson, you will write your own thesis statement. Do the rest of the steps in this lesson in the packet using all of the support that I've given you and me as a human being in class to help you come up with that thesis statement. Thanks so much.